Hello 28,000 subscribers. What's up? It's Vivs from Slider here. Today I'm going to talk about intent resolution in Android. If you're a beginner and you're hearing this word for the first time, don't sweat it. I will show you what this looks like in a minute. But in this video, we're going to talk about the concept behind action and category tests, which means there is no code. Data tests require a lot of details within them, and therefore I won't be talking about them in this video. Before we start, let me show you something. If you go to slidner.com, I already have a very detailed article that talks about all these things. What are intents, how to start different things with them, what are explicit, what are implicit intents, what is the example for both, talks about action, category, data, extras, and what you can do with that, an example of that, and all the other little details out there. So be sure to check this article. Post link is right below in the description text. Now let's get started. As you know very well, intents are like messengers in Android. They run from one place to another and are responsible for delivering messages. So on the left side, you have this guy who's basically an intent. He's like a postman. And on the right hand side, if you'll see shortly, what you have is someone like an activity or a service or a broadcast receiver. Now this intent wants to deliver its message to or call this activity, service, or broadcast receiver. However, there are some conditions that need to be met before such a call can happen. You cannot just directly go to a Hollywood star's house and you can say hi, right? They have a security bodyguard, something like that. The intent filter works in a similar way. Now, the intent you have or the intent that you create has action, category, and data. The intent filter inside your manifest file in the XML also defines action, category, and data. And somehow, using certain rules, these things are matched to check if this intent is capable of being delivered to this activity, service, or broadcast receiver. And this whole process is known as intent resolution. So let's take a look at those rules and get started. First, define your intent filters in the manifest. Intent resolution is handled completely by your Android package manager. An incoming intent is tested against an intent filter to match action, category, and data, like I said in the diagram. And then the intent filter is considered matching only if all three tests succeed. Now this is very important. Now component can have multiple intent filters. Now when it has multiple intent filters, at least one of them should match with the incoming intent. And if there are no intent filters defined, then basically there is no question about implicit intents anymore. It's basically an explicit intent. So you have to know the name of that class, that is the activity or service or a broadcast receiver, and directly call it rather than having stuff like that. So let's take a look at action test first over here. Action, as you guys are aware of, or if you haven't heard before, describes the operation that you want to perform. For example, I can define my own actions by saying android.intent. Oh, this is a standard action. Sorry about that. This android.intent.action.boot underscore completed indicates kind of stuff like your Android device has just completed restarting or booting. All right. So action describes the operation to be performed or the operation that has already been performed. You use package like naming convention when you're making your own actions. For example, this is a predefined action which is android.intent.action.boot underscore completed, which basically indicates that your Android phone has finished booting up. In Java, when you make actions or when you want to refer to actions, you simply use a variable that will contain the actual string, but inside your manifest file you're supposed to use this entire string value as it is without modifications. Now an intent must contain max one action because that's the whole purpose of implicit intents. When you want to call someone else without knowing their name, action is the most important criteria by which you are able to know whether they are capable of performing your action or task or not. And at the same time, your intent filter may contain zero to many actions. So how do they actually match up? Let's take a look at that. So on the left hand side you have the intent, on the right hand side you have your intent filter. Now I have purposely done a nice mistake in this diagram. I have written one to many actions here for the intent filter, even though I previously said zero to many actions. Let's take a look at why I did that. So the first question that you gotta check is whether the string that defines the action, is it the same inside the intent and the intent filter? And when you say same, is it case sensitively same in both of them? And that is the first step that happens. If that comparison matches, then that means everything is perfectly fine. Now the intent filter has many one-to-many actions. Now remember, if the intent filter has zero actions, it's not going to match any intent, so there is no point in that. Therefore, when you have one-to-many actions, you know very well that on the left hand side the intent is always going to have one action. Now that action on the left must be contained here in the list of actions defined by your intent filter. In other words, does the intent filter define the action of the intent amongst its list of actions? If yes, then there is a match. Now intent with no action defined matches all the filters that have at least one action out there. So in this case, when you talk about intent with no action, further distinction is going to be made on the basis of category or data out there. So now let's take a look at category test and try to figure out what that does. Categories are basically used to categorize stuff and when it comes to activities, services, broadcast receivers, and components that you have. For example, if your activity defines category underscore home, it simply means that you want your activity to start as soon as the device first boots up. It's like the home activity where you contain other stuff inside it. Now same way, when you define your activity to have category underscore launcher, it simply means that you want your activity's icon to appear in the launcher screen of all the applications installed on the device. So these categories, as you can see, basically categorize stuff out there. Now package style naming is again the same thing that you're going to be using. If you want to make your own categories, they can be something like slider.vivs.category.erasable. Now mostly you won't be creating custom categories because the default ones are more than enough for all the purposes in most cases. Again, the same rules apply when you want to create category strings. In Java, you simply have variables that contain actual values, but inside the manifest, you're supposed to use the actual string like slider.vivs.category.erasable out there. Now, intent can contain 0 to many categories because it's not compulsory that you specify a category inside every intent. At the same time, an intent filter contains 0 to many categories. Let's take a look at how they both match up. Again, the same case here. There's your intent on the left, the intent filter on the right, and now we are talking about categories. The first step that's going to happen is going to be the string case sensitive comparison of both the strings, the one defined here for the category inside the intent filter and the one defined here within the intent. Are they the same? If yes, then there's a match. Now remember, since an intent can specify one or many categories, now every category that is defined by the intent must be contained within the list of all the categories that your intent filter is going to define. In other words, if your intent has 3 categories defined in it, say category underscore A, B, C, and if your intent filter contains A, B, C, D, E, F, then that's a match because A, B, C, D, E, F contains the formal, right? So when you specify an intent with no category, it's going to match with all the filters, including the ones that don't have any categories inside them. Now category underscore default is something you must include in your activity if you want it to be started from an implicit intent, because it basically tells the Android system kind of something like this activity actually plans to work as something that's going to be started by another implicit intent. So with this, we actually kind of wrap up the concept behind your action test and category test. Things will be much more clearer when we take an example and work them out. There's of course data test that we need to talk about, but it's too massive. It will take maybe a video or a couple of videos to go into that. In the meantime, if you guys do like what you saw, please like this video, share this video, subscribe to Slide Nerd, and let us know your thoughts in the boxes right below. And of course, don't forget to check out the article at the bottom. Have a nice day.